Hi everyone, my name's Aunty Kath and I look a little bit different today. Got my hair up and I'm here again to tell you another story. And today, once again, it's for Jack and Ella, my nephew and my little niece. And then it's for my other nieces who are Iz and Anna, Sophia and Ellen, and my big nephew James. And once again, does he really want to hear it, our James? Will he ever watch it? Who knows? He might. Right, well, on Monday we had Mr Noisy, if you remember. And in Mr Noisy, and I think you like these faces, we had Mrs Crumb, who worked at the baker's shop, and this was her smile. And then we had Mr Bacon, the butcher, and this was his smile. I like Mr Bacon's smile. And last night, once again, I had more bacon. This time, with spaghetti again. And there was a few mushrooms in it. And very nice it was indeed. In fact, your Uncle Paul made it. So thank you, Uncle Paul. And then yesterday we had Mr Cool. He was the cool dude. He didn't really have a smile. He always seemed to be happy. But that story was about Jack Robinson, if you remember. So that was Mr Cool. And I promised you yesterday that we'd have a new story today. And it's all about Mr Fussy. And there he is. There's Mr Fussy. I bet you he's a bit of a fuss pot, but I don't know yet. And I thought because he was in green, I'd dress in green. So there we go. It's my green top, like Mr Fussy's. But I'm not fussy. I'm not a fuss pot. In fact, I'm not a fuss pot at all. Right, let's see all about Mr Fussy. There we go. Let's have a look. I'm looking forward to this one, actually. So I don't think I've read this before. And here he is, Mr Fussy. Well, do you know, Mr Fussy was fussy about everything. Absolutely everything had to be neat and tidy. Tidy and neat. Everything in its proper place. Mr Fussy spent all day, every day, rearranging his furniture and making sure his flowers grew in a straight line. Can you see them? All in a straight line. All his flowers, there they are. And trying to find specks of dust where he couldn't possibly find specks of dust, because he spent all his time making sure there weren't any specks of dust anywhere. Just looking at my plate here. Ooh, a few on there. I guess cleaning that later. One fine morning, Mr Fussy was having his breakfast. He was very fussy about what he ate. Very fussy. He decided that morning he was going to have some marmalade. Probably with a piece of toast, I would think. So he opened the marmalade pot. Oh, he said, it's got bits in. And do you know what he did? He spent the rest of the morning separating the bits from the marmalade. Look, there's the marmalade with all the bits in. Separating the bits of orange peel from the marmalade. Or if you prefer, he separated the marmalade from the bits. Oh, fussy old fusspot, people used to call him. Fussy old fusspot. That's what he is, I think. A fussy old fusspot. Doesn't even look very happy, does he? Look at his face. And that's our Mr Fussy face. Unlike our Mrs Crumb face. And our Mr Bacon face. That's Mr Crumb. No, that's not Mr Crumb. That's Mrs Crumb. She's got the smiley face. But Mr Fussy, he looks like that. So Mr Fussy went out into his garden. And what do you think he did there? He spent the rest of the day straightening out all the blades of grass in his lawn. Look at that. Who'd have the time to do that? I think your Uncle Paul would. He used to cut the edge of the lawn with some nail scissors. He's a fussy old fusspot, Mr Fussy. Look at him. That night, Mr Fussy was in his kitchen ironing, wait till you hear this, his shoelaces. When he heard a crash outside. What's to do? He muttered to himself, and he hurried outside to investigate. And there, with a broken garden gate in one hand and a battered old suitcase in the other, and a sheepish grin on his face, stood a very untidy person. Look, who that could be? Very untidy. Mr Clumsy. That's who it was. Mr Clumsy. Oh, I don't know whether Mr Fussy's going to like him or not. Whoops, he said, holding the garden gate. Came off in my hand, he said. Hoo, spluttered Mr Fussy, looking at horror at his garden gate. Who are you? He said. I'm Mr Clumsy, said Mr Clumsy. He was grinning, and he stepped forward to shake Mr Fussy's hand. But as he did, he tripped and fell over on the lawn. Crash! With the suitcase. Wonder all his clothes didn't come out. Oh, Mr Clumsy. My grass, cried Mr Fussy. My straight grass. You bent it. Do you know what he did? He got down on his hands and knees and he started to straighten the blades of grass. Oh, what a fussy old fusspot. And while he was doing it, he looked over his shoulder and he said, But who are you? And why are you here? Oh, I'm your cousin, said Mr Clumsy, your long-lost cousin, all the way from Australia. And I've come to visit you. And look at that lovely smile. I'd see if we can give Mr Clumsy a smile. Oh, that's a Mr Clumsy smile. So now we've got a Mr Clumsy smile. We've got a Mr Fussy. Well, he doesn't have a smile. He has a... We've got a Mr Bacon smile. And a Mrs Crumb smile. We're doing well with our smiles. Aren't you pleased to see me? He said. And as he did it, he knocked over a flower or two. And he picked up his suitcase, knocking over another flower or two or three. Mr Fussy quite obviously wasn't pleased to see you. Oh, you better come in, he muttered. Come in. Into his house. Look, there is his house. I say, remarked Mr Clumsy, looking through the front door of Mr Fussy's house. I say, what a neat little place you've got here. Very neat indeed. And as he stepped inside, Mr Clumsy tripped over his shoelaces, as he often does, and he knocked over a chair, dropped his suitcase, and fell in an untidy heap on the floor. Oh dear, I don't think Mr Fussy's going to like him. Whoops, he said. Whoops. Mr Fussy shut his eyes. Oh, and he heaved a sigh, and he groaned silently to himself. Oh. Later that night, after Mr Fussy had cooked them a meal and after Mr Clumsy had helped with the dishes and broke 2 plates, they sat down to chat. Mr Fussy sat as he always did, very neat and very tidy. Nice and straight like you sit in school, that's how Mr Fussy sat. Mr Clumsy sat as he normally did, not so neat and tidy. He sat with one arm up and one leg up. I don't think I can do it. Whoop, can you see me leg? Oh no. Oh, there it is. One leg up and just relaxing all over the chair. Oh, that's lovely, he thought. But Mr Fussy didn't think so. How long are you staying? Asked Mr Fussy. Oh, I don't know, grinned Mr Clumsy. But that grin. A few days, a week, a year. I haven't decided yet, he said. Oh dear. Oh dearie dear. Well, they both went to bed, and when they got up in the morning, Mr Fussy jumped out of bed and went into his bathroom. No, he gasped. Oh no. Oh yes. Mr Clumsy had been there before him. The towels lay in a heap on the floor. The bath was full of water, and there were pools of water all over the bathroom, and half a tube of toothpaste all over. What a mess. Mr Fussy tidied it up as quick as he could. Oh, he didn't like it at all, and he had that face on him. Then Mr Fussy hurried downstairs. Morning, said his cousin very cheerfully. I've cooked your breakfast. Sit down. There was a mess everywhere. There we are, said Mr Clumsy, carrying a plate of fried eggs, broken fried eggs. Towards the table he carried them. Breakfast, he said. And then he tripped over those shoelaces of his. The eggs flew through the air. Ooh. And what do you think happened then? Yes, they landed on Mr Fussy's head. Sticky, greasy, yellow fried eggs all down his face. Whoops, said Mr Clumsy. After a week, Mr Fussy's house didn't look like Mr Fussy's house anymore. Look, doors broken, windows, curtains everywhere. It was a mess. But after 2 weeks, Mr Clumsy decided he was going to leave. Thank you for having me, he said to Mr Fussy. It was very nice to see you, replied Mr Fussy, very politely, although he didn't really mean it, did he? I don't think so. But what he really was thinking was, it's very nice to see that you're going. Cheerio, said Mr Clumsy, and off he went with his battered old suitcase and that lovely smile. Goodbye, called Mr Fussy, really meaning good riddance. Then Mr Fussy fussed around the house like he'd never fussed before. Fussy old fusspot. He was polishing and mending, repairing, straightening, sorting, cleaning, putting everything back exactly as it had been before Mr Clumsy had come. He even dusted the flowers in the garden. My word, what a fusspot. I wouldn't dream of doing that, would you? God, I don't even dust me cupboards. Never mind dust me flowers. Well, that evening Mr Fussy was in his kitchen. Oh, he was so pleased to be in his kitchen all by himself. But you know what he was doing? He was polishing. You know, he was polishing an egg. Polishing the outside of an egg. When all of a sudden, he heard a crash outside. Oh no, he groaned. Not Mr Clumsy back again. It can't be. It mustn't be. It isn't. And it wasn't. It was somebody else. Somebody who just walked straight through Mr Fussy's garden gate. Somebody who can't help having little accidents. Somebody you might have met before. I know somebody Jack's met before. In fact, it's one of Jack's favourite Mr. Men books. It was, in fact, Mr. Bump. "Hello," said Mr. Bump. "I've come to visit you." Mr. Fussy had that face on again. But I haven't got the story of Mr. Bump here, but I'm hoping to get it. But there he is, Mr. Bump, on the back. And he's the blue Mr. Man. And he's got bandages around him. And you can guess why. Why do you think? Because he's always bumping into things, Mr. Bump. So that was the story of Mr. Fussy. And hopefully, if I get hold of Mr. Bump, I'll hold him tightly and give him a cuddle. Then I'll tell you that story. If not, I'll do something else for you tomorrow. So we've had Mr. Fussy. We've had Mr. Cool Dude. And we've had Mr. Noisy so far. Hope you've enjoyed the stories. It's Aunty Kath saying goodbye. Have a lovely evening, all of you. Love you lots. Bye.